my name is Justin, and I'm an addict. And I've been actively working the steps in the rooms of recovery since September of 2013, and I'm grateful to be sober one day at a time, thanks to my God, the steps, and the fellowship of other addicts. RECO12 is an organization with the mission of learning and sharing the similarities of addiction of all kinds, and gaining and sharing tools and hope from others who are walking a similar path. Speakers from our past meetings have represented many fellowships and identify with addictions with such variety as alcoholism, drugs, food, sex, gambling, theft, just to name a few. Each Friday at noon Central Time, we hold a live lunch hour speaker meeting with a recovering addict from anywhere on earth, pertaining to any or no faith tradition and with any background, who shares their experience, strength, and hope on a specified recovery topic of their choice. Now, for the next 12 weeks, we will be focusing on each of the 12 steps of recovery. And our speaker today will share for 20 to 25 minutes on his experience with step one. And then the live audience gets the opportunity to ask questions of him for another 20 to 25 minutes. Donations and podcast ratings and reviews are greatly appreciated, and details on doing that will be in the chat of the live meeting and in the show notes of the podcast. If you are listening and also feel that RECO12 is of value, please consider rating and reviewing the podcast in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. It's a great way to help us get the message out to more addicts who suffer and are seeking tools for recovery. We look forward each week to receiving the light reflected from our speakers. That light inspires hope, meaning, worth, and growth in us, the listening audience. Now, here's a quick disclaimer before we get started. While we hope that these episodes will be helpful to both sponsors and sponsees alike, the next 12 weeks of episodes are not intended to replace the necessity of working with a sponsor through the steps. We will not be working the steps in these meetings. They are meant only to be a supplement and informative references on what the steps mean and why they are important to the individual speaking about them. Once again, we will be covering step one this week, and step one reads, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, or insert your addiction here, that our lives had become unmanageable. Now, here's a little bit about our guest speaker today, Robert P. Robert first came to recovery through the back doors of Gamblers Anonymous in December of 1985. Trying to overcome his gambling disorder, Robert quickly learned that he had more than a gambling problem. As his life would begin to deteriorate around him, Robert finally went into treatment on February 9th of 1986 in Las Vegas, Nevada. When Robert arrived, he was addicted to alcohol, drugs, pornography, gambling, compulsive overeating, and bulimia. Robert would stay sober for 71 days, and then his lack of honesty resulted in a relapse. Robert returned to Alcoholics Anonymous April 25th of 1986 and has been clean and sober ever since. Robert runs a website called recoveryguy.org and is on most all social media channels. Robert publishes a blog every Thursday and a fresh podcast every Tuesday. Robert is committed to the 12 steps of recovery, a loving God, an active sponsor relationship, and serving others. Robert believes that if you are willing to work a program that works, you can get well. Robert will celebrate 36 years of personal recovery this April, and his mission in life is to stay sober and help raise a new generation of recovered people. Take it away, Robert. The floor is yours.
Hey, thank you so much, Justin. I really appreciate you and your mission. I don't know if I shared it with you before, but usually twice a month when I get opportunity, I go to an open addictions meeting just north of Salt Lake City in Bountiful. And there you could be adult child of alcoholic, Al-Anon, a member of SA, EA, OA. There's no opening. We have open readings, and it's a very open format. And so I, as a person who predominantly does AA recovery and 12-step recovery with a leaning toward drinking, I think what you do in bringing speakers from all recovery windows so valuable, and I want to encourage your listeners to not only listen every Friday, but go back through your library of the different speakers and the different topics, because I think there was a lot that could be killing us when we were out there. And I always remind people that I did come through Gamblers Anonymous, that I knew that there was something wrong, because you can't have the failures in life that someone like me has without something being wrong. But we're so sick. We hold on to the thing that's killing us most. We're willing to admit so many things, but whatever you do, don't touch the thing that gives me breath. You know, don't touch the thing that tells me I don't have to go kill myself. Because for so many of us, death is the next step. You know, because the pain of losing your family because of our addiction, of losing countless jobs, of family members who have, what do they call it? They know what you're calling, caller recognition. They know it's you, and so they don't even answer. They shut off their voicemail because they don't even want to hear what we have to say. And this has not just happened once. For many of us, this happens over and over again. And our bottoms get deeper and more challenging and more despairing, that it amazes me that in spite of all of that, Justin, I was so reluctant to say I was powerless and my life had become unmanageable. With all the evidence that there was, I just couldn't do that because it's not that I wanted to die. I just didn't know how to live. And again, if you asked me to stop breathing, I wouldn't consider it. But when pornography, when a blackjack table, when 3 large pizzas from Boston Pizza or a quart of gin or a gram of cocaine, when that's your breath and someone's asking you not to breathe, you can't do it. And I never meant to harm my wives, right? I had 2 before Laura. I never meant to walk out on my daughters. I never meant to do the bad things. And I had to understand that I wasn't a bad person trying to get better. I was very sick, Justin, and I needed to get well. And one morning on February 9th of 1986, I'd got to that place where I looked in the mirror and there were no longer the voices questioning my sanity. As I would tell people, I heard voices, some were real and some were imagined. I'm not sure which were which at this time. But I remember standing in the mirror and seeing me, and I would hear these voices and sounding like the Tabernacle Choir or the Johnny Mathis Orchestra. They were in my head saying, Bobby, 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 what are you doing? And it was every person I'd ever disappointed who no longer thought they could help me, and so they had to let me go. And I stood there alone. And Justin, for the first time in my life, I saw myself as dead. I had just turned 32 years old, and I was going to die. And there was nothing I could do about it. And I will never forget the pain. I will never forget the emotion. And that is why I've been able to stay sober almost 36 years. Because I will never forget that moment when I realized I can't do this anymore. I am going to die if I don't get help. So I went to the Yellow Pages, and for those of you youngsters out there, we actually had a book. It was called Yellow Pages, and you would actually go through them. It wasn't Google on the phone, right, or yellowpages.com. And I started looking under alcoholism, of all things, Justin, because I would have never admitted I was alcoholic, because my thing is, once you admit you are something, now you're responsible to not be that thing. I was intellectual enough to know that. And the credo of every addict, regardless, you know, obviously I had a food addiction. I wasn't going to let you find the extra gallon of Haagen-Dazs. I was going to hide that, you know, just like I was going to hide my methamphetamine, just like I was going to hide my porn collection from you, or not let you know that I was really going to the strip club in Las Vegas, Larry's Villa, or wherever, instead of going to the market or to that meeting where I said I was going. We're always hiding. We're never admitting. And so, but that particular morning, I looked under alcoholism. And interestingly enough, I grew up in downtown LA, like downtown LA, where the original Angels Flight was, on Bunker Hill, 3rd and Hill, as downtown as LA as you can get, just 4 blocks from Skid Row. And so, and my dad worked very closely there over on 7th and Alameda. If you're anyone out there familiar with LA, it's the shipping yard, the rail yard, the trucks go in and out. And so I knew what an alcoholic looked like. They were disheveled. They were most often homeless. They had unkept hair. They usually didn't bathe, and they drank cheap wine, right? So I didn't fit any of those, although eventually I would, right? Those are one of my yets in life. And so for me to look under alcoholism, it was divine intervention before I even knew what divine intervention was. And so I looked in the yellow pages under alcoholism, and I just started dialing the phone. And I would call center after center after center. And finally, a counselor at the Nevada Treatment Center said, look, if you can show up here with $50 and you can be here in an hour, we will talk to you. And so I called my dad, who was sober by this time. My dad had been sober 7 years by this time. And I called up my dad and I said, Dad, I need your help. And of course, his first reaction was no. But then I said, Dad, I can go into treatment today. They'll talk to me if I can get there in an hour. I didn't have a car anymore. I didn't have a driver's license. If I had $50 and I'd lost $1,000 the previous night at Davy's Locker due to my gambling condition, right? We come in pretty twisted. And so my dad was there as quick as I'd ever seen him move. And my dad dropped me off there. And that was my journey into recovery. You know, as you're well aware, Justin, in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, for those of you who relate, it says we had to admit to our innermost self that we were alcoholic. This is the first step in recovery. And that's what I did in that moment. I didn't know I was alcoholic, but I knew something was wrong, and alcohol had a lot to do with it. And so I went into treatment that day, and that was my journey into step one before I even knew that there was a step one. So I went into Nevada Treatment Center, and I met just a wonderful group of people who I would later find out were actually members of AA as well. Doc Irvin, Tom Bennett, and Steve M. And they introduced me to a way of living that I never realized possible. They began to share their story with me. And it was so relatable. I understood that it wasn't me, it was what I was doing. And it wasn't, again, that I was bad. I just had unresolved pain that I needed to be medicated against. So I stayed in that treatment center for 7 days, and they introduced me to AA and started going to meetings over at the Turning Point in Las Vegas, Nevada. And I began to understand, and I believed in AA so much that they offered me 90 days of residential treatment. And I thought, you're going to want something from me I don't think I can give. So I thought I would try the easier, softer way, which I thought at the time was AA. Because I thought, well, if you have me captive, you're gonna expect things of me that I may not be willing to give. And either fortunately or unfortunately, me at the time, I wasn't quite homeless yet. I would become homeless. So I started going to Alcoholics Anonymous and NA and OA. And again, I had gone to GA originally. I wouldn't realize my sexual addiction until I was about a year sober, until all the rest of the cloud began to settle, the dust began to settle, and I realized the sexual addiction that I had and my addiction to pornography, and how it was replacing actual relationships, where I didn't have to be a hostage or take a hostage. There was a sense of neutrality, right? With either the prostitute or the thing that was online. And so or the magazine. There was not a lot online back then. And so I began to work the way I could. And I looked at step one, and I knew what it said on an intellectual basis, but a real fear, and I laugh about this now because it's the furthest thing from the truth of 12-step recovery. I really believe, Justin, that if you knew everything about me, you would ask me not to come back, because I was so sick. I mean, I would have intercourse with a girl in the parking lot of my apartment while my wife was waiting for me to bring home milk to my daughters. That's who I was. And I was ashamed. And I could barely face that myself, let alone admit it to my sponsor or someone else in a room. Because you would say, no, we're not here for that. Because I didn't understand what recovery was about. And so I was only a little bit honest, but as I would learn, half measures availed us nothing, right? Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. And I wasn't ready to do that. And so I went back out, because the pain, Justin, when you have unresolved pain, a Band-Aid only does me so good. When I had melanoma cancer, my dermatologist, he didn't just say, well, let me just scrape off the top. We'll put a Band-Aid on it and you're going to be fine. He said, no, let's dig a little bit deeper, because we need to get at the root of the problem. And it's the same way with step one. So when I went back out, I was trying to recapture that feeling of being an almost, because I wasn't convinced I was going to be a something or a somebody. And I quickly learned that AA really did screw up my drinking. It had shown me enough truth that even though it was elusive, I thought maybe I could reach it. Because I heard enough stories from the men and women, Justin, that I thought, you sound a lot like how I was, and so much like who I want to be. So when I came back on April 25th, 1986, and I coincidentally ran into my sponsor 2 hours after the late lunch bunch meeting was over. And when again, God was doing for me what I could not do for myself. Had I known Max was there, I would have avoided him. But I thought I could slip in the back door. And there he was waiting for me. And that was my journey to true recovery. Because then, Justin, I was willing to admit to my innermost self that I was alcoholic. Not only that, I was powerless over alcohol, and my life had become unmanageable. My life, not a part of my life. It says in the 12 and 12, and I'll read here It says, who cares to admit defeat? Practically no one, of course. Every natural instinct cries out against the idea of personal powerlessness. And that's where I had to get to. I can't do this anymore. And it says that further down on page 21 of the 12 and 12, it says that unless he first accepted his devastating weakness and all its consequences, until he so humbles himself, his sobriety, if any, will be precarious. Of any real happiness, he will find none at all. And I knew that, Justin, because I had relapsed thinking that truth did not hold for me. But truth is a funny thing. Truth is universal. We see that in the universe. We can't escape the law of gravity. Newton's theory of motion is real. The light and dark, how dark can't be in light because it doesn't perceive it. I don't have to ask darkness to leave. I just have to turn on the light. And just like when I was willing to admit I was powerless, that I really didn't know anything at that point, was I ready to take certain steps. But it was only until I said, I admit I am powerless over alcohol and all the other things that went with it. I was powerless. I could not go and place a bet without losing a check. I could not go to the strip club without picking up on someone or showing up 2 days later. You know, I couldn't start eating a gallon of ice cream without eating the whole thing, and the drugs and the alcohol, because I tell people oftentimes my middle name was Moore, right? You've heard me say that. And it was more drugs, more alcohol, more pornography, more medication, because I did not know how to resolve this pain. I was reaching for power that I did not have. And until I was willing to admit I was powerless over alcohol, and my life had not just a little unmanageability, but by my terms was completely unmanageable by anything. And then I realized how much step 2, and I don't want to get ahead because that's next week, of course, but sane people don't do what people who have power do. Or by, you know what I'm saying? You know, only insanity would promote a person who had no power to think that they have power. And once I was willing to, once I said I didn't know, once I said I can't, then everything else opened up to me. Then and only then. Without this first step, and I will tell anyone, and this comes with great authority, Justin, 6 people, there's others, but 6 people, including myself. There's Buddy C, there's Slow Will, there's Scott Shields, there's Steve M, and there is Eddie P, and myself. Between 6 of us, we have 235 years of recovery. And every one of us believed the same thing. Every person who was instrumental, who died in their sobriety, believed that step 1 was the foundation, was the ingredient, because until I do step 1, Justin, why would I do the rest of the steps? As long as I think I have power, as long as I think I can manage, it says I have to cease fighting everything and everyone on page 417 of the big book. And at last, acceptance seemed to be the answer to all my problems. I had to accept that I was really sick. It was only then that I would say, would you please help me? You know, Winston Churchill in 1952, Prime Minister of England, said, everyone wants to be taught, everyone wants to learn, but no one wants to be taught. I found that I needed to be taught because I can't do this anymore. And it was only by me saying I can't that you came alongside me and said, Robert, we can. And I believe that if you don't do step 1, you'll relapse. period. And if anyone wants to dispute me, I'll give you my email. You can find me. We can have that conversation. But until I was ready to admit I was powerless over alcohol, pornography, drugs, you name it, and my life was unmanageable, I stood no chance. Because I would always, like a programmer who writes code, they have a back door, right? In case they lose their code, they can always go back. I don't have a back door. There is no back door. There is no turning back. And I would never ask someone to climb a ladder without stepping on the first rung. Matter of fact, it violates OSHA principles.
Very good, Robert. I so appreciate your share. Before we move on to the Q&A, are there any other things you'd like to share before we go into that Q&A portion?
You know, I believe in accountability, and that's a lot what step one does. I believe in sponsorship. I believe in whatever you're doing, do it to the best of your ability. Every one of these programs works if we work it. You know, oftentimes I will hear people on social media especially say AA doesn't work, SA doesn't work. You know what? It didn't work because you didn't work it. Period. You know, if you're a Muslim, listen to your imam. You know, if you're Jewish, listen to your rabbi. If you're Catholic, soak up every word your priest says. If you're LDS, you better pay attention to your bishop, right? If you're a Baptist, listen to your pastor. You know, if you're the Buddhist network, you better pay attention to some of the historical teachings and philosophical approaches to living that network and Buddha represents. Otherwise, you can't say it doesn't work. You know, I can't put two wheels on my truck and wonder why it doesn't drive down the street. It doesn't drive down the street because I don't have all the wheels on it. You know, so whatever we do it to the best of your ability with accountability.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Robert. Now we're going to jump into the Q&A portion of the meeting. For those of you who are here live, if you have a question for Robert, please type it in the Q&A link at the bottom of your Zoom window. It looks like two speech bubbles over the top of each other. I'll get to those, and we'll. I've also written a handful of questions here that I'll be asking as we go along. But I'd like to start off here, Robert. You know, I've heard this said several times before, many times before, that step one is the only step that I need to do perfectly. What are your thoughts on that? Do you agree with it? And if so, or if not, why or why not?
You know, thank you. That's a great question. And that's really out of my playbook. I can, first of all, I completely agree with you. I had this great friend of mine, and his name was Pete the Greek. And Pete the Greek at the time was sober about 18 years. He was a crazy valet driver at Caesar's Palace. And Pete the Greek would tell me, I'd say, what step are you on, Pete? And he'd say, step one. And I'd say, what do you mean you're on step one? And he said, Robert, it's the only step you have to do to perfection. Father Martin has a great series, and you can YouTube all this stuff on step one. Father Martin actually says step one, and we've heard it before, is foundational to every other step. And he says it much more eloquently than me. Even though I do step one as part of my daily step 10, the minute I think I am not powerless over alcohol is the minute I think I can have one. And since I have a mental obsession coupled with a physical allergy, the physical allergy is stamped in my DNA that tells me I can never drink, never use safely again the rest of my life. Not even at my own wake, right? And the mental obsession tells me, oh, you can have one. There is no such thing as one. It does not exist. And that is what is understood in step one. You know, and I love the chapter more about alcoholism. There's, I think, 17 or 18 things there that I check off box. Every time I hear that in a meeting, Justin, I check, yep. Swearing off forever with or without a solemn oath, going to sanitariums, going to healthcare farms, switching from scotch to brandy, agreeing to quit if ever lost in the job, all those things, all the things it says. And I think I've done that. I've already checked those. Whether or not I have another drink in me, I do. And that is why I stay active in my recovery, why every day I do steps 10, 11, 12. I just don't know. I don't know if I have another recovery in me. So why challenge that? So absolutely, I will be powerless over alcohol and my life will become unmanageable for the rest of my life. And I couldn't be happier.
Awesome. Thank you so much for going through that with us, Robert. Early in your share, you talked about hiding. You talked about hiding versus admitting. I'm going to hide all of these things that I'm addicted to. If you wouldn't mind digging a little deeper there, give some like real world examples of what you see yourself or maybe others hiding, and even from themselves, even from yourself in that process.
What I would most try to hide was the loneliness. And just the feeling of not measuring up. How, because the pornography, the alcohol, the food, they were a way to medicate. They were never the problem. They were just a way for me to keep from blowing my brains out. But how do you tell your wife you want to sit down and have marriage therapy? Oh, by the way, I sleep with other women. So you begin making excuses because that's too embarrassing. That's breaking the covenant that you sworn before your wife and God and the person overseeing the service. You can't admit to losing a paycheck to, Binion's Casino when your rent was due tomorrow. You hide and you say you got jumped. So because there's a degree of embarrassment because we're not taking responsibility as a man, as a woman, and that is very shameful. So we do things like we rationalize, we minimize, and we deny are in the corner of every addict. Rationalization, minimization, and when necessary, deny it.
Yeah, thank you. Hiding the loneliness. Thank you for sharing that. When I thought of that, I thought, well, I hide the fact that I'm unfaithful to my wife. I hide the fact that I'm drinking. I hide the fact that I'm this, that, and the other. But the loneliness is really what I'm hiding in those public settings. I get out there and I put on that mask and pretend that everything's okay, but it's not. And thank you for going through that. I appreciate that.
And really to add that, and I appreciate you jumping on there now real quick to the degree that how lonely we were. This was back in the mid 70s and I was at the LA Coliseum. Rory Gallagher, Robin Trower, and Jethro Tull were performing. And I remember, and it was just in a moment, and I wouldn't get sober for a number of years, almost 8 years after that, or 14 years after that. And I remember looking at the cloud now I was drunk. I was probably high on mescaline, and I know I smoked a lot of dope. So I was out of my mind. But I remember looking at the crowd. There was approximately 100,000 people there. And it struck me, how could I be around these many people and yet be so alone? And I remember that moment, that instant. And then, of course, it went by me, right? And then I continued to enjoy the concert. But in that millisecond, I remember being with 100,000 people, but still being lonely.
Yeah, that's a great and crazy example of that. You're surrounded by 100,000 people and yet feeling alone. And so many of us, myself included, in active addiction, I could be in a room full of people and feel absolutely lonely.
Yes.
Very good. So a couple of minutes ago, you referenced, hey, going to marriage counseling and not telling my wife or just dropping it, hey, I sleep with other women. How does step one apply to the spouse of or the family of addicts? So often we think, oh, what I'm doing is only hurting myself, or often other times maybe a spouse says, that's your problem, it's not mine, you have to deal with that. How is step one applicable to the spouse or the loved ones of the addict?
Well, that's where understanding the unmanageability of our life comes into play. And I don't want to get too far ahead, because you have to be very careful in the beginning not to blow everything up. I think a lot of times it's kind of like, having a racehorse that you need to teach it how to respect the reins. In skiing, it says don't get too far over your skis, right? Same thing there. And so I think we have to be careful in saying, confessing certain things before. And I think those types of things, confessions toward others and sharing in that marriage counseling thing, I think those things in the beginning are left for a priest or some type of clergy or a sponsor, where it's safe and you can process it and understand the damage that it will do in the beginning. Because if I get too far ahead of myself and admitting my powerlessness over my addiction and the unmanageability of my life, and all of a sudden I start trying to make amends to people, that's going to be an emotional response to a deeper problem. Let's process it first, because I believe in total honesty. However, I believe, I again, don't want to jump ahead. Step 9 actually says, became willing to make direct amends to such people if to do so would not injure them or others. So we have to be very careful in injuring other people. And the last thing we want to be is that person who says, hey, I'm fine, everyone else should be fine. Hey, I haven't drank in 5 days, can I come to your barbecue? Right? It doesn't work that way. We have to earn, we have to learn our way back.
Yeah, I appreciate that. My sponsor once told me, you've been going into this forest for 30 years. You can't expect, and dragging your wife along for, 15 to 20 years of it.
Yes.
You can't expect to get back out of the forest and have everything clear in a week or a month or even a year or longer. It's going to take a long time to get back out of the forest and have clear skies again.
Yeah. Yeah. When it comes to damage that I did, I'm still, with my oldest daughter, I'm still doing some damage control. We get along great. We get along better than ever, but it's not where either of us want to ultimately be. So we continue to work on that.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. We have a question from an anonymous attendee here in our live audience. They ask, what is your daily spiritual practice or 12-step routine?
Oh, wow. That is, I'm so glad that you believe I have one. That's important. I believe to stay recovered, you must stay in recovery. If you want to keep what you have, you keep doing what you did to get it. And so daily, I do a 10-step where I continue to take personal inventory, and when I'm wrong, promptly admit it. Step 10 is really interesting because step 10 exposes my need for a higher power, because I can't do this alone. And that's where step 11 comes in, where I sought through prayer and meditation to improve that conscious contact with God as we understood God, praying only for the knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. So step 10 tells me I need help. Step 11 is my help and my source of power. And then step 12 gives me my daily direction. Where having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to other addicts and to practice these principles in all our affairs. So I recognize I need help, I get help, and I go give help. And that is my daily routine. One of the great things about step 10 is that I take it throughout my day. So when I'm wrong, I promptly admit it.
Yeah. So if I hear you correct there, it's not just at the end of the day review thing. While that happens, it could be happening, but it's throughout the day. Oh, look, I just was wrong in this thing that I just did. I need to figure that out.
Yeah.
Inventory
Yeah.
it, pray, and go and serve. Go do something about it.
Now, sometimes I don't realize I did something at 10 o'clock in the morning till I unpacked my day at 10 o'clock at night. But if I realize I did it, let me tell you an example. This is a true example. I was in a meeting a few weeks ago, and I was offended by the secretary of the meeting, almost to the degree that my ego wanted to walk out. And I thought, no, there's too many people here who know you've been sober a long time. You represent sobriety. You sit your butt down and get over whatever you have to get over, and you can go address this person at the end of the meeting. That's what my higher power said. But that wasn't enough, Justin. When the person called on me to share, I said, before I share, I want to tell you I'm sorry. I'd gained and I said this in a room of 50 people. I said, I want to apologize. You may not know, but I had a real resentment against you. And what you said offended me. But I was offended beyond that which was reasonable. And I know you didn't mean it that way. So I would just hope that you would forgive me. And I said, of course, man, I forgive you. I said, I appreciate that. Thank you. And then I went on to my share. That's how seriously I believe this, Justin, because had I not done that, Justin, just like step one, if I feel that urge, obviously I overcome that in step 10 because I no longer have to do step one. Step 10 says it's a continuum to take personal inventory. And when you were wrong, admit it. No, promptly admit it. So I promptly admit it.
Thank you. The next question I have for you has to do with bringing our bottom up. We hear, we say, I understand that I have to hit my rock bottom. Now, my rock bottom may be higher or lower than somebody else's, but I want to talk about things that I lose. In addiction, and I think this, for me, it sets the foundation for step one of admitting powerlessness and unmanageability of my life. What are some examples of things maybe you have lost in your own life, Robert, or things that you see others have lost that help you see that? And does it help or hurt to compare the things I've lost with the things that other people have lost? You understand what I'm saying?
I'll tell you what, Justin, I think that question keeps many people from recovery at large, and it keeps individuals from recovering to the degree that they can, because I believe that in my bag of life are yets. You know what a yet is?
Yeah, I think so, but go ahead and define it for us here.
A yet is something that hasn't, but has yet to occur. And the only way it won't occur is for me to stay on my path of recovery. One of the things I'm very grateful for, Justin, is that I have this fictitious family, and they're called the Jones family of 5. And as high and as intoxicated and distracted I was going through countless intersections for years, I never killed them. Therefore, I'm never that prisoner that I visit in the local Utah prisons or Adelanto Correctional Facility in Adelanto, California, or in the local jails. I'm not that person. I know they exist because I visit them in prison. And I don't understand why God's mercy spared me from that. But I know that is something that waits for me if I decide that I can have one drink or one drug or going to see that topless stripper at the burlesque is okay, because I will lose my family. I will lose my job. I will lose my freedom. When I was for those of your audience who don't know, I'm actually a certified drug counselor, and I've done DUI counseling in California. And one of the most challenging things was multiple DUI offenders, because these are people who've gotten 2, 3, and 4 DUIs, and yet no matter what they lose, they fail to see the connection between their drinking, their using, the rest of their behavior with the infraction or the penalty they have to face. And raising the bottom was very important to Bill early on in recovery. He actually said, we have to raise the bottom so not everyone who comes in thinks they need to hit my bottom or your bottom or Bill's bottom or Chaz's bottom or Susie's bottom or Wendy's bottom, that the bottom that they're at is sufficient enough for them to say, I've had enough. I remember sitting with this friend of mine named Kirk, and I was about 7 years sober, and he was going through a severe meth addiction. And I went over to his house to do an intervention. And I said, Kirk, if you don't go into treatment, let me tell you what this is going to look like. You're going to lose your house. And this is not rocket science. This is just stuff that happens, right? You're going to lose your house. You're going to lose your business. You're going to lose your wife. And your infant daughter is going to call somebody else daddy if you don't go into treatment. Now, I would have rather been wrong. But sadly, I was experientially prophetic, because that's what happens. Sometimes we think things that people can't see aren't harmful. But you know what? If I'm not upstairs with my 7-year-old grandchild, but I'm downstairs looking at porn, I will never be the person that 7-year-old grandchild or my wife, my significant other, needs attention, needs someone to talk to, share with, have some intimacy, but I'm having a relationship with someone who doesn't care about me and I will never meet. We have to understand what can happen when we don't. And anyone who's relapsed out there and has struggled with their addiction, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, thank you so much, Robert. Before we close this up, do you have any final words of wisdom, parting shots that you'd like to leave with us?
If you're new or relatively new to recovery, sometimes all we can do is just come back. Just come back sober. That's all. And no matter how hard it gets, just come back, because in the beginning, we can't even see the steps because we're just trying to survive. We're just trying to get through a day without acting out, and whatever that means to you as a person, whether it's a drink, whether it's a drug, whether it's a porn site, whether it's an illicit relationship. It means so many things to different people. So we all act out in one way or another. So sometimes that's our victory. Well, today I have 3 days that I didn't have to disappoint myself as I disappointed others. So allow time to do what time does. I heard something a long time ago from a person who wasn't even in recovery. And they said that quantity has a quality all its own. And I believe that as we see we can do this one day at a time, we then look at ourselves in a different way. Maybe I do have value. Maybe I can be that good spouse. Maybe I can be that good father. Maybe I can be that good brother or sister or employee. Maybe I am somebody. Most importantly, every recovery program is designed. This may be the most important thing I say today, Justin. Every program regardless of where you're coming from. Every program of recovery is about developing a relationship with a power greater than yourself. It's not to teach you how not to use, how not to gamble, how not to act out, how to eat, not how to throw up. It is to teach us how to have a relationship with a power greater than ourselves. And as a result of that relationship, we will no longer act out.
Amen. Thank you, Robert. That was a great RECO12 weekly speaker meeting for all addicts and those wanting to learn more about addiction and the recovery therefrom. If you have any other questions that we aren't able to get to in this meeting, please feel free to go to RECO12.com/forum and join in our community and ask those questions and answer others' questions that may come up. I invite the audience to come back next week. If you have not yet rated and reviewed the podcast in Apple Podcasts, please go do so now. It's a great way to help us work our 12th step, and you work your 12th step in the process and sharing this message with others. Next week, we will be covering step 2, and Sarvi P will be handling that. And she has an amazing story that ranges from Iran to Toronto to California, and it's going to be a good one. Thank you, Robert, for kicking us off here with step 1. Now let's launch off into the rest of our day with the 3rd step prayer. And Robert, if you'd like to be voice there, that would be amazing.
No, go ahead, please.
Okay. God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. Amen.
Thank
Keep
you,
coming
man.
back, everybody. It works when I work it, so work it. You are worth it.
Standing still a moment, carving out this time, reflecting on the landscape of this life of mine. Peaks too high to conquer, streams too wide to cross, troughs too deep to walk through without incurring loss. Yet here I am, still standing tall, despite the rough terrain. One like me survived the storms and walked through wind and rain. Still standing, I will fight the good fight, still searching for glimmers of light, feet still on the ground. I can still be found, standing still.
My wings are torn and tattered, but I know I still can fly. I may not soar unfettered, I may not rise too high.
Recorded in the book of life and binded with the seal